True Crime Conversations acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast was recorded on. Social media influencers. They can hold a lot of sway with their followers. After all, they can convince you to buy products, invest in Bitcoin, adopt lifestyle changes, dress a certain way, get plastic surgery. But could an influencer make you give up your life, reject your entire family and friendship circle, and become a sex worker to pay for her lifestyle? When journalists started to uncover the truth about Brazilian influencer Cat Torres, they would have no idea just how far her influence had spread and just how terrified those who'd been sucked into her web would be to share their stories. But a few brave women, some who would suffer the consequences of going up against self-help guru and divine voice-hearing Torres, would turn to the very same people who'd made Cat Torres famous to finally bring her undone. I'm Claire Murphy, and this is True Crime Conversations, a podcast that explores the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. Cat Torres was a poor girl from the favelas of Brazil, but she'd managed to leverage her beauty into a life that seemed almost too good to be true. With famous friends and a modelling career in Europe and then the US, her social media feed portrayed a life of wealth and luxury of a woman who'd really made it. But lurking behind that shiny social media facade was a much darker story. One of influence taken to the extreme, of mind-altering substances, contact with aliens, and a woman who took influencer to a level that many would not consider someone with a face as angelic as Cat Torres's was even capable of. How did an influencer become a cult leader and sex trafficker? Well, it was as easy as hitting like and follow. Chicho Felitti is a journalist, self-confessed influencer himself, and the host of the Don't Cross Cat podcast. He sat down with us to discuss the intense tale of Cat Torres. Do you remember the first time you saw Cat Torres' face? I'm presuming you would have seen her on Instagram, but do you remember the first time you actually saw her face?
And yeah, I do recall. Obviously, it was on social media. She was a big online presence in Brazil, but she wasn't quite my niche. She wasn't my cup of tea. I think she was very endearing to young Brazilian women and people who dreamt the American dream. But I do recall running by her profile on Instagram prior to all the accusations and prior to all hell breaking loose. And I remember thinking, oh, good, just another one, just another blonde influencer who looks like a Barbie and who's trying to sell her stuff. She would try to sell everything, her lifestyle. She would try to sell clothes. She would try to sell tea. She would try to sell mystical consultations. And I was like, okay, one more, seen that, done that. And I was done with that. But then a couple of months later, I would say a year later, I start hearing the news and start reading tweets about her possibly committing crimes. And then my stare at her, my glance at her switches a little bit to a more professional glance, which is not, she's not my cup of tea as an influencer, but she might be holding a good story. She might be the person whose story I'm about to tell.
So at no stage looking at those initial shots of Cat Torres, did you think, yes, this is definitely the profile of a future cult leader?
Not in a million years. Not in a million years. She looked like another influencer, and we're crazy about influencers in Brazil. We're wild about them. So there are so many of them. Never would I ever have suspected that one of them might be the leader of a cult.
Well, let's take a step back to where you decided to investigate Cat Torres. What was it about her story and about her case that made you think that there is something really interesting here?
I like crimes that hold a bigger story behind them. And I do believe that when we talk about Cat Torres and we talk about the power of influencers in 2025, we're talking about a game of deception. We're talking about how much of our agency and how much of our time and how much of our energy we're giving away to people we don't know. And we're choosing to be scammed because it might sound a little dramatic, but I do believe that the internet, especially social media, are lies. We're lying all the time, even if not consciously. We lie all the time on our social media, all of us, including myself. And I'm an influencer, so I'm shooting my own foot here. So I do think that it was about time for us as a society to start discussing what social media is doing to us. And Cat Torres is the ultimate example of how bad things can go if you follow someone you don't know and you believe in someone's lies up to a point where you will give them your life, basically.
Well, speaking of lives, let's just have a little look at Cat Torres's life first before we get to where it led you to investigate her. What was her childhood like in Brazil? Was it a pretty standard upbringing? What do we know about her family life before all of this came to be?
She was poor. And when I say poor, I mean Brazilian poor, which is so much poorer than an average Australian or an average North American would think. She was miserable. She was really poor. She comes from no money, really hard upbringing. She barely had food on the table, but she was graced with beauty, or what people tend to find a beautiful body, a beautiful face, a beautiful complexion, a beautiful mane of blonde hair, and she used it to get where she wanted. So she comes from a region in the Amazon forest. She moved a lot because her father was an alcoholic and he was unable to keep a steady job. And she had many problems in her upbringing. She comes from a dysfunctional family, and she eventually starts working when she's 14 or 15 years old, always using her body and her looks in order to obtain what she wants. Whether that is money, whether that is power, whether that is influence, it was her way out, I have to say. And many of her childhood friends say so. Her sister says so. She was one that used what nature had given her to get somewhere. And she did got somewhere.
So modeling was her ticket out of there, right?
But first modeling, but she wouldn't quite be a fashion model. She wouldn't be in fashion shows. She wouldn't be. She moved to Milan at a very young age when she turned 18, but she wouldn't get the prestigious gigs. So she would do lingerie photo shoots. She would do swimsuit photo shoots, all that sort of stuff. And she started having relationships with elder men when she was about 19 or 20 years old, richer and older men who would provide for her.
There was a rumor that those older men might be connected to Russian mafia, wasn't it? Like that potentially one of those men that she was, I guess they call it a sugar baby for a sugar daddy, was maybe even friends with Vladimir Putin. Do we ever know if that was proven, or was that just discussion amongst her friend group?
That's what's very peculiar about Kat Torres' story. I mean, many of the facts that are circling around and seem like rumors turn out to be close to truth. So her former husband, which I met in the US, Coburn Bell, says she stated herself that she had dated someone very powerful in Russia that was in the petrol industry, and she knew about geopolitics of the Middle East and of Russian well-kept secrets that weren't in the New York Times, for instance. So she had access to classified information about Russian politics. So that's what is very astonishing for me in Cat Torres and her case, that many things that seem outrageous, seem impossible, seem made up, turned out to be true. And this is one of the facts that couldn't be verified, but many people who lived with her and were friends with her, or even her former husband, say that she had access to information that no one outside of the closed circles of Russian oligarchs would know. So she holds true. It's such an unbelievable cautionary tale, but it holds so many truths, like dating Leonardo DiCaprio. She was reported to date Leonardo DiCaprio, and Leo's people, of course, denied it. But then again, they were photographed together in Cannes Film Festival. So that's undeniable. I mean, she was in the same room as Leonardo DiCaprio, and they exchanged glances and they touched each other, and they had some physical contact. So many of the things that helped her become an influencer and famous on social media were based on truth. If they were not altogether truth, they were pretty much based on accurate events.
Can we talk about her early Instagram life? Because in the beginning, it was about ensuring people believed that she was living that rich and fast lifestyle, that she was actually in that crowd and was earning that kind of money. And her husband told you about like having to quickly take photos of her up against rich people's cars, which were obviously not hers, like Ferraris, etc., but like having to get the shot really quick before anyone busted them, basically.
Yeah, she was faking it until she made it. She was pretending she was a millionaire in the US, which is something that holds a lot of value in Brazil. In Brazil and the whole of Latin America, we look up to the US, especially people who don't have many opportunities here, who couldn't go to college and who couldn't get a new job. They see moving to America as a potential to get rich and to have access to a wealth they wouldn't have in Latin America. And she was playing downright for those people. She was acting as if she was shopping in Gucci and Prada. And so she was taking pictures with Gucci bags over her bed. She was taking pictures lying down in the hood of a Ferrari, which wasn't hers. She would just go out in the street and act as if she had a Ferrari. She didn't. She would go into five-star hotels and ask to see a room, and then she'll have several pictures taken inside that room and said, yeah, I'm staying here at the Marriott. I'm staying here at the Four Seasons Beverly Hills. And she actually wasn't. But the fact is, she was actually getting somewhere in the US. Her projection of image on Instagram and social media wasn't completely fake. I mean, she made it to a music video of a Fast and Furious song that was on the franchise of the movies. I mean, that is big for someone who came from South America with nothing and had no parents and no relations in the US. I mean, she achieved things. But of course, she would showcase on the internet a larger version of those things she had achieved, or a misperception of those things she had achieved, as she would act as if she was Angelina Jolie or something, whereas she was a newbie, an actress who was struggling, who was hustling a lot in the US.
So that does evolve over time, that Instagram presence. Do we know what started that shift from trying to live that life to trying to be more of a guru?
Once again, I think there's some layers of truth to her change because she started going to ayahuasca rituals, which is the root of a tree in the Amazon in Brazil that has psychedelic effects. And it's a religion in Brazil. It's an ancient religion which is used by indigenous communities. But then she started hanging out with some people in Hollywood who would drink the tea, but they were not related to the Brazilian tradition at all. It was more of a party. It was more of a new vibe thing. People close to her and even herself told me that she actually believed in the tea and the tea changed her mind. And she did become more spiritualized to the point of thinking she was able to talk to God, saying out loud she was able to have conversations with Jesus and aliens. So I do believe there was a fruitful inner change in her prior to changing her niche on Instagram. I don't think it was just a business plan. Now I'm going to serve new age and I'm going to sell yoga clothes and I'm going to sell. I do tend to believe, and we have learned that she actually changed herself prior to changing her online persona.
She wrote a book called The Voice, which she did do an interview with a Brazilian talk show host about and admitted that she'd written the entire thing whilst in a trance. But what was this book about and what is this voice that she's referring to?
She says in the book and in the interview with Amaury Jr. that she had a connection with a voice that could be God, eventually could be aliens. She changes her version quite a bit. That would tell her things about the future, would predict the future, would let her read other people's minds. And she said she drifted apart from the voice when she was at an early age, but after starting having ayahuasca, she got in touch again with the voice. She restated this contact with the voice she heard in her mind, which is hard to define because she herself is not able to define it very well. But I would say it's a voice that sometimes is God and sometimes it's aliens. It's fishy. It's hard to try to make sense out of it because it's very nonsensical. But that's what she says. And in the book, it's a memoir book in which she narrates her life with changes and facts that are not verifiable and things that are blatantly lies. But it's her version of her own story. The book is her version of her own story, and it was really successful in Brazil. It wasn't a bestseller or anything, but it did reach many young women who looked up at Kat and who admired her and who started believing she was a guru, believing she could help them out with her superpowers.
So through this time, her online following goes from like a couple of 100,000 to more than 1 million. And so she's really starting to influence a significant amount of people. And she's utilizing this voice that you described to have these one-on-one consultations with women about a myriad of things, their career choices, their families, about their relationships. But what are we finding out that she's actually telling these women in these consultations? Because you did speak to some women who'd had those consultations and who had friends who'd had these consultations. What was she doing and telling these people to do during those one-on-ones?
She was pretty much advising young women to be submissive and to look for rich men and to act very girl-like around them and to pretend to be more frail than they actually were and to drop out of college and to try to get pregnant with someone who was richer than them. So it was very, I would say it would dwell a little in misogyny. They were very misogynistic advices. And I've heard from tens of people who had consultations with her and who followed her advice. And she would even tell people who were in an abusive relationship, who were battered, women who were actually battered, not to look for the police, not to call the police, not to break up with the boyfriend, not because that was male energy. So it's a little surprising that a self-made woman would, she was almost like a red pill in that sense.
When does it start to change from having these one-on-one consultations and giving women advice like that to her kind of flipping to wanting women to come and physically join her and live with her? Because she's moved to Texas by this stage with another man, not the husband that you referred to earlier. She's divorcing him. But then she wants to create essentially a witch's coven.
It's not quite clear because she wouldn't tell it outright to her clients, to her followers. She would always ask for help for the first, at least for the first couple of them. Desiree Freitas, who is one of the main characters of Don't Cross Cat, the podcast, was told that Cat was in a bad place and she was having suicidal thoughts and she needed someone to be around her. So she didn't quite invite Desiree to live with her, to work with her. She was like, I'm not feeling good. I'm in a bad place. I'm afraid I might hurt myself. Can you come here and keep me company? And Kat buys her a plane ticket to go to Texas and live with her, allegedly to help her out through dark times. When Desiree gets there, Kat starts proposing her a business partnership. And she says they will have a holistic clinic together. They will open up a spa, a place of well-being, but they would need the resources for that. So Desiree should get that money somehow. And she suggests Desiree starts dancing in strip clubs and Desiree starts doing sex work.
She's not the only one, right? there were several women who ended up going to Texas. Were they all essentially forced into domestic labor or sex work whilst living with Kat?
We've got in touch with 3 women who were able to prove they lived with her in Texas, and 2 of them report that they were coerced to dance in strip clubs and to do sex work. And the third one of them, Jamila, who was a yoga teacher already in the US. She was living in the US in the Boston region. She moved to Texas because she was about to be evicted. She was about to become homeless, and she moves to Texas to teach yoga to Kat and to Kat's followers. She gets there, there's no yoga classes, and she has to drive Kat around to be Kat's chauffeur, Kat's driver, and to clean the house up. But she refuses to dance at a strip club, and she refuses to do sex work, so she only stays there for a couple of weeks and leaves. Whereas the other 2 eventually succumb, eventually agree with Kat's requests and Kat's orders, and start working in the sex business in the US.
Do these women ever see any of the money that they are generating for Kat? Like, how are they surviving?
I mean, they were staying at Kat's house. Each one of them had a room, but it's a classic case of human trafficking. She would say she needed to pay for the groceries, she needed to pay for the gas to drive them to the strip club, she needed to pay for all of her basic needs. So Cat Torres would keep all the money they would make doing sex work or dancing at strip clubs, and she would keep it pretty much all to herself. So they would make thousands of dollars a night, and they would not see this money. They would come home and they would have to hand out each and every dollar bill to Kat, who would put it away, and said she was saving that money so she could invest in the business they would eventually open up together, which wasn't quite true. She was spending that money in her lavish lifestyle. She then would show on Instagram to get more followers and get more people to live with her.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Claire Murphy. I'm speaking with Chicho Filiti, host of the Don't Cross Kat podcast. Up next, we uncover what Kat was telling women to keep them from leaving once they'd realised that they weren't there for the reason she'd claimed. How did she convince these women to stay after they realise that they're not there for the purposes that Kat has drawn them in as? Like, cult leaders employ lots of different tactics to keep people believing in what they're telling them. What was Kat telling them, and what was she doing to make sure that these women didn't just up and leave?
I do think it's a complicated issue because human trafficking and cult leaders employ different forms of coercion, which are not specifically locking a door or keeping someone at gunpoint. But these people who went to live with her, not Jamila. Jamila, I think that's why Jamila was able to get away so quickly, because she wasn't a follower of Kat's. She did not buy the Kool-Aid. She did not believe in anything. She thought it was all mumbo jumbo, in her words. But the other 2 women who ended up living with her in Texas, they really believed in her. They had paid her thousands of dollars for counseling, and they really saw her as an idol and a friend. So at first, there's a flattering sense of this person I admire so much. I know from the internet she's so famous. She actually wants to live with me. So that's almost like an awarding feeling. And they also believed or claimed they believed in her superpowers. So they were afraid, and she would menace them. She would threaten them by saying, I can do bad things to you and to your family. I can use the voice to make your life miserable. And there are recordings of her saying she's able to make someone have butt cancer. And that's the term she uses, butt cancer. I'm giving you butt cancer with my words. So they actually believed in the witchcraft and all of the mystical stuff Kat was selling online. So I do think that was part of what led them to stay in the US, even though they were being clearly abused. They had been trafficked.
This is something that seems to be a thread throughout all of this in your podcast and every other thing that I've seen about Cat Torres, is that people are genuinely terrified of her. Like the people who have since spoken out after everything happened, a lot of them want to remain anonymous because they don't want to be targeted. But like she's one pretty blonde lady with an Instagram account. Like, what are they so scared of?
I do think there are two things to fear there. The first of them is the mystical powers, which is not very rational, and I don't think that we who stand from an outside perspective are quite able to understand. But there's a very palpable one, which is she was famous and she would diss people on the internet. She doxed Patty, who's Desiree's best friend and who starts an investigation to try to find her friend once Desiree disappeared. She actually posted pictures of Patty and her kids online and said that Patty made her infants, made her small children do sex work. And that was seen by hundreds of thousands of people. So she actually had the power to ruin someone's reputation. She actually, and that is not a mystical power. That's an actual power. She was able to destroy your life if she wanted to. She doxed Patty's address, Patty's phone number. Patty started receiving hundreds or thousands of calls after Cat Torres published her phone number on Instagram. So there was the mystical side to be feared by the ones who believed in it, but there was also a potential of destruction and influence she held online, and that was very palpable and very objective.
You speak to Patty throughout the Don't Cross Cat podcast, and she really put herself on the line to try and help her friend get out of the clutches of Cat Torres. But Kat really tried very hard to get rid of Patty, right? So you mentioned that she doxed her, but also she got Desiree to record messages to tell her to go away and tell her everything was fine. But was it Patty and that group of people who started to investigate things themselves, because police seemed very reluctant to get involved in this investigation? Was it their motivation to expose this that finally did bring Kat undone?
I think that for people who are close to Desiree and Leticia, the two young women who actually stayed in the house for months in Texas, it was a search based on friendship and love and concern. But then when it started getting traction on social media, there were so many armchair detectives in Brazil all over the country who started investigating this case by their own, not making a penny, and they were able to help, which is something I also find fascinating about the story. We tend to think that of armchair detective as incompetent people who are standing on the way of police or the justice system. But no, in this case, the armchair detective saved the day, which is something I had never heard of. And they were young women who many of them followed Kat as well and believed in Kat for a while prior to turning against her and to taking her to justice. That's why this it's such a fascinating story to me in the sense that we usually tend to think of the cops as the good guys or the justice or the prosecutors. In this case, had not been the armchair detectives and the network of tens or hundreds of Brazilian young women who were on the internet obsessed with this case, I don't think Cat Torres would have been arrested and deported.
So it's the best and the worst of the internet all combined. Social media influencer gone bad. Armchair detectives come to the rescue.
Very well said.
The FBI does eventually get involved after Kat is exposed and she flees. What happens to Kat after she's arrested in Maine?
First, the American authorities have to check on her status because she was married to an American man. So in theory, she had the right to have a green card. She could have been there legally, but she never requested a green card. So she was illegal there. And that based on that, the American authorities decide to deport her to Brazil so she can be judged by her crimes in Brazil since she's not an American citizen. And all of the victims were Brazilians as well. None of the victims who came to public were American. They decide to deport her in Brazil, and she gets to Minas Gerais and is immediately arrested by the Brazilian federal police since she was in the Interpol wanted list. She was in an international wanted list already, so she goes straight to jail as soon as she lands in Brazil.
She is eventually convicted, sentenced to 8 years in jail. And then she gives that unhinged interview to the BBC from jail.
There is no way I send a message to a person saying, come to live with me in America, I'm going to enslave you, or you're going to work for me. In my house, nobody worked.
I think the messages that we've seen from multiple women are fake.
Absolutely, yes.
What about the bank transfers from Desiree, where she's depositing money into your account?
The same thing.
What do you make of that interview? Because she is asked about whether she could influence people to do the things that they did, and she basically claims she's completely innocent.
She does. And it's how the trial goes as well. During trial, she denies facts that are easily verifiable. I mean, she denies having those women over at her house, and there are pictures, there are videos, they were there. There's the neighbors saying, there's everyone saying, there's the police finding them there, and she blatantly denies it outright. And then she also gets unhinged with the judge, and she starts bossing the judge around, and she starts asking the judge to be quiet, something I don't think many lawyers would advise on. So I haven't got the chance to be face to face with her, but we did exchange letters, and she showed another side of her in which she denied the crimes, but she admitted to having relations with those young women who moved to Texas, but also having a big expectation of her followers saving her from jail. She actually says, and that's verbatim, if they know I'm here, they will destroy this prison and they will get me out because they love me. So there is something there. There's a sense of grandeur and there's a sense of importance, which might not be precise, which might not correspond to the reality.
Next, I asked Chicho what he thought of Kat after he got the opportunity to speak with her one-on-one. From your interactions with her, would you say that she was corrupted by the power that she managed to achieve with, her millions of followers? Or does she seem genuinely mentally unhealthy? What's your take on where she's coming from now?
It's hard. As someone who's seen the story from outside, it's hard to tell. But what I can say is that she's been assisted by psychiatrists. She's been medicated. She's been diagnosed. She's been deemed healthy enough to serve time in jail, not serve time in a psychiatric ward. And I do think there's something deeper there in which her behavior is a reproduction of what life has made to her. She was advising these women to act exactly like she had acted all her life and had achieved the things she had achieved by acting that way, by acting submissive, by going out with older, richer men who would provide you, by getting pregnant of someone who was very powerful. I do think there's a level of trauma there, and there's a level of someone who had very little chance in life and made it. One of her friends says that she was honestly trying to help this woman. She believes Cat Torres was actually trying to help this women by giving her her roadmap, the roadmap of her life. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I don't think, because it wasn't a big scam. She didn't got rich with it. We're not talking about millions of dollars. We're talking about a lot of money. But had she married someone who was a millionaire or a billionaire in the US and she had the opportunity to, she dated a big movie director in Los Angeles who was a millionaire by hundreds of millions. She could have made more money acting in a different way than trafficking her followers. So I do think there's something there which we might not never reach on her psyche. Is why has she done this? She could have made money. If it was for the money itself, she could have made money in different ways. Why would she choose to traffic her followers to the US and put herself in risk? And she knew she was committing a crime. where she could have made money in many other different ways, which were not necessarily illegal. So I do think there's something there that speaks to her soul, which is hard for us to define.
There's definitely a lesson in this for all of us. I mean, you personally have reflected on the fact that you are actually an influencer yourself, and you have to take into account the power that being an influencer holds. But do you think there's a lesson in us maybe having to stop and remember that a lot of what we see on social media platforms is essentially a lie?
It's a lie. There's an example in the Portuguese version of the podcast, which didn't make the cut to the US version. One of our friends says, when you go to a beach, do you take a picture with the crowd in the crowded beach, or do you try to go to a specific point of the beach where in this right angle with the right light, it will look like you're alone in the beach? And we do it all the time. Everyone's lying all the time on social media. I lie all the time on social media, and it was somewhat difficult for me to realize that I was also part of it while investigating this case. I mean, if I have an advertising today for, let's say, a pop company, a soda company, and I've got a bad migraine or I had a huge fight with my husband and I'm feeling like shit, I'll smile nonetheless and I'll say, this is a delicious soda, you should have it. And it's a lie. It's a job. I think we should, first of all, always be aware that the internet does not correspond to the reality. These people with hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions of followers are not your friends, and that they're there working, which is legit, which is okay. It's a job like anything else. We do not expect Drew Barrymore or Meryl Streep to be our friend. They're there working, even though we admire them and we feel close to them. But there's a sense of proximity which exists in social media, which is very deceiving. People who are influencers tend to act as if everyone who's following them is their friend or has access to their personal life and it's part of their entourage. But you're not. You're not. It's just maybe we should see them as we see Meryl Streep. And that would be a healthier decision. And I guess we would give less away our agency, we would give less away our time and our money for people who are acting as if they're our friends. They're not our pals. They're not.
Chicho, what happens to Kat Torres when she finishes her sentence? Like, will she be allowed to go back and be an influencer? Was she allowed to have another Instagram account? Like, is she barred from doing any of that once she gets out?
No. She will come back and she'll come back stronger, especially knowing Brazilian social media landscape like I do. People will be so interested on her. She will make it to Big Brother Brazil, which is our biggest TV show. I know Big Brother is kind of small in some countries, and like it's huge here. It's our biggest television show. And if she doesn't make it to Big Brother, she will make it to A Fazenda, which is the second one. I think it's more probable because they do like people who have been involved in problems and controversy in their cast. But she will come back stronger because that's what the internet lives on. The internet breeds on trouble, breeds on novelty, breeds on beef, and she brings the beef. But she says she wants to be a country singer. According to her own words, the internet is for idiots. I want to be a country singer. So that's the official version. But I'm doing a little projection here. I'm doing a little. I think she will come back stronger in Brazil specifically. It has happened. I mean, we have created mega stars. A young woman who killed her parents became one of our biggest stars on social media.
Wow.
Or killing her parents.
Watch this space, I guess, when she hops out of jail. Keep an eye on Instagram or the country music charts, whichever way she decides to go. Chicho, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us on Cat Torres today. We really appreciate it and you giving us some of your time. Thank you.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you to Chicho for helping us tell this story. True Crime Conversations is hosted by me, Claire Murphy, and produced by Tali Blackman with audio design by Jacob Round. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another true crime conversation.